What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're talking about the Death Guard faction reveal article for Warhammer 40k 10th edition. We're just coming off the back of having almost the entire rulebook spoiled for the edition, so we have a lot greater knowledge of what the core mechanics of the game are going to look like, so we can review these faction articles with a little bit more certainty and a little bit more context than we did previously. Now, in this article, we do get a pretty good look at what Death Guard are going to be doing on the table, given that we have both their detachment abilities and army special rules. So let's dive right in and talk about some Death Guard, starting with Nurgle's Gift, their army rule. This is the Contagion ability that they had previously, and it's basically the same. It grants them an ever-growing aura that reduces the toughness of enemy units within 3 inches of models with the Contagion aura, starting at 3 inches on the first battle round and moving up to 6 and then 9. We don't know whether or not there's going to be other effects that are able to be applied by the Contagion range, like there are in the 9th edition codex. Right now, it doesn't appear so. It looks like they're just going to be getting that -1 toughness Nurgle's Gift, but there may be additional effects that are spread by the Nurgle's Gift aura. I guess it's also important to mention that these do progress a little faster than they did in 9th edition. In 9th edition, they started in engagement range, and on turn 2, progressed to 3 inches. But now they'll start at 3 inches and move up by 3-inch increments every subsequent turn, up to a maximum of 9. The detachment ability is also a pretty impactful one. Spread the Sickness gives the entire Death Guard army locking objectives. They get the objective secured ability, like we've talked about previously on Astra Militarum Shock Troopers and other similar effects. A lot of factions are getting access to this style of ability, and it's going to be a really big deal, especially for a low model count, kind of tepid army like Death Guard that wants to be pushing forward as quickly as possible so they're not caught out of position on important turns. This also makes you kind of immune to battle shock, since you're going to be able to lock in an objective and hold it down even if your unit is broken and not able to normally hold objectives. The other benefit of Spread the Sickness is that it grants the objective marker the Contagion aura. This one's a little bit funkier because it only projects that Contagion aura if it is being controlled by your army. So if your opponent moves onto it and takes it away from you at the end of their turn, then the aura is gonna go away, and you're not gonna get the benefit of it either way. But once you get to those larger aura sizes in the later turns of the game, being able to spread the sickness off these objectives is going to be a huge deal. That's a big swath of the table that's going to be impacted by the toughness manipulation aura. Now, what units are going to be able to benefit from that reduced toughness on enemies? The first datasheet that we have spoiled are the Blightlord Terminators. These guys have gotten a little bit of a change from their previous version, although they haven't really retained the objective secured ability that they had previously. It used to be in 9th edition that Blightlord Terminators had objective secured innately, and that has not been represented by a high OC value in 9th edition. So they are going to rely on, most likely, Plague Marines to be those high OC models that are going to be holding down objectives for them while they move forward. Unfortunately, they're not very good at moving forward at only a movement of 4 inches. However, they have been increased to toughness 6. That said, they have lost all of their defensive mechanics. It used to be that Death Guard either had a 5+ Feel No Pain or reduced damage, incoming damage by 1, and they have neither of those now. It may be that similar defensive effects are applied by attached characters to the unit, but we simply don't know. They do retain their 2+ save and 4+ invulnerable save, but this is now the standard Terminator stat line that everyone has: 3 wounds and a solid leadership value of 6+. Their weapons are really where things get pretty interesting. They're boasting the Blistering Fusillade ability, which gives them reroll wound rolls of 1 against the closest eligible enemy unit. And they have some high volume weapons that can benefit from these. We do finally see the profile for the Reaper autocannon. This is a little bit of a difference from the Havoc autocannon, the 3 damage variety, but it is much higher rate of fire and gets both sustained and devastating wounds. Sustained hits 1 gives it automatic additional hit rolls on critical hits, and devastating wounds on critical wounds converts those wounds into mortals. So even though it is only an AP value of 1, it is still going to be pretty solid at tearing up some light or medium infantry, or even chipping a couple damage onto a tank. That said, it is only coming in at strength 7, so it's going to have a little bit of a tough time damaging that tank if it's not getting those devastating wound triggers. Combi weapons also return with the same profile that we have seen previously. However, the plague weapons are the name of the game for the Death Guard, and we see them brought here as the Plague Bolter, the Plague Spewer, and the Blight Launcher. And these have some pretty sweet abilities attached to them. It looks like all plague weapons have lost their reroll wound rolls of 1 for lethal hits, which is, in my opinion, a little bit of an upgrade. They're going to automatically wound anything that they shoot at on a 6 with a critical hit roll, thanks to that lethal hits ability. Regardless of whether or not it's a vehicle, a tank, infantry, they're going to be forcing some number of those wounds into whatever that they're shooting at. So that makes these Plague Combi Bolters able to fire up to 4 shots at half range pretty devastating. And that's similar to the Blight Launcher. It is only strength 6. It's solid against infantry at AP 1-2 damage, but it's able to automatically convert those sometimes if it's able to get those critical hits through. The Plague Spewer is pretty exciting. It is a torrent weapon, and as we've talked about previously, torrent weapons are going to be incredibly powerful in this new edition because of the ability to overwatch in multiple different phases. So you can use auto-hitting weapons to make great use of that overwatch. And in this case, this overwatch is pretty terrifying. It is D6 torrent shots at strength 5 AP 1 for 1 damage. However, it has both the anti-infantry 2+, allowing it to critical wound any infantry in the game on a 2, and it ignores cover as well. So that AP 1 is going to go a little bit farther than you would normally expect. It's anti-infantry 2+, and if it's targeting the closest unit, which it probably is because it's 12 inches away from you, it's also rerolling its wound rolls of 1. So that thing is most likely going to fully convert against enemy infantry. That Plague Spewer is real nice. Otherwise, these guys have pretty mediocre melee profiles. All of their melee weapons also have that plague weapon effect, being lethal hits. They either have 4 attacks with their bubonic blade, hitting on 3s at strength 5 AP 2, or 6 attacks hitting on 3s at strength 5 AP 1, 2 damage with the Flail of Corruption. Although we don't see a return of the flail effect, where excess damage carries over and is able to kill multiple models. We could maybe have seen a devastating wounds or something on that flail, but it doesn't look like that has made the transition to the new edition. Now, the article does talk about these guys like they have had some sort of massive defensive glow up, and really the only benefit that they've gotten is +1 toughness while losing -1 damage. So in the comparison to 9th edition, these models are wildly easier to kill than they were. Now, the Blightlord Terminators are all well and good, and I think getting an indication of what the plague weapon mechanic is going to do in the new edition is pretty sweet. But the exciting one, for me anyway, is the Malignant Plaguecaster. These guys have always been amazing in 9th edition, able to do just a boatload of mortal wounds while staying relatively safe and being a relatively inexpensive solid psyker option, and they sort of retain that identity in 10th edition. We see that we can expect the power armored bubonic Astartes to come in at toughness 5 because this Malignant Plaguecaster has that profile. He has only 4 wounds, an OC value of 1, and a 6+ leadership, as well as his base 3+ save, and unfortunately for him, no invulnerable save. His weapons are pretty impressive though. He does have a Plague Bolt Pistol, which is interestingly not a bolt pistol, which allows him to fire it in addition to his other weapons, although it doesn't allow him to fire it in melee, unfortunately. Not sure if that is a mistake or not. Who knows? His Plague Wind is his psychic attack, either firing a unfocused variety at strength 4 AP 1. It is a torrent, however, so it automatically hits at a 12-inch range for D3 damage, or it can focus that Witchfire to gain the hazardous keyword, increase its attacks to D6+3, and gain strength 6 AP 2 D3 damage. That hazardous profile is amazing, and as we've learned in the rulebook, it now only forces a single check on the caster. On a 1, the caster would take 3 flat mortal wounds. However, that is command point rerollable, so you can potentially try to shake those mortal wounds if you elect to focus that Witchfire and you perils at the wrong time. A little bit of a weird idiosyncrasy of the hazardous weapon roll, and one thing that I don't know is entirely intended, is that if you put this guy in a Plague Marine unit that is carrying plasma guns, if he hazardous and explodes with his focused Witchfire, you can actually remove the plasma gun model instead of doing damage to him. Not sure if that's gonna make the transition over, but that is something that exists in the rulebook currently. In melee, he's no slouch either, with 4 attacks, hitting on 3s with strength 6 AP 1 for D3 damage, also with that lethal hits characteristic, so he does have a reasonable chance to get those hits through on a vehicle. And his Plague Wind does have an additional effect in his Pestilent Fallout. After he's shot, if he has scored a wound against an enemy infantry unit, you can reduce 2 from the move characteristic and advance and charge rolls made for that unit. Unfortunately, this is only a 12-inch range, so he's going to have to be already close in order to use that, so this is largely not a super impactful effect, especially because it's infantry only, but it's something, I guess. Now, importantly, we do see another iteration of a psychic power on this guy's datasheet. This is the Gift of Contagion psychic power and triggers in your shooting phase. As we've seen on other psychers in the past, like the Farseer and Orc Weirdboy, it works on a 2+. However, on a 1, the psyker's unit takes D3 mortal wounds. Interestingly, this can be taken on anyone in the unit, not just the psyker itself, so it's not exactly like the hazardous effect from his overcharged Plague Wind. Kind of a weird idiosyncrasy where one of the psychic effects will damage him, but the other one will damage his unit, but it means that he has less of a chance of blowing his head off for casting 2 spells. If the psychic power is successful, you choose an enemy within 18 inches and visible to the Plaguecaster, and until your next shooting phase, that unit gets -1 to wound in melee. This is a pretty impactful effect for the type of army the Death Guard want to be playing. They want to put this guy in a big brick of units and run them up to the center of the table. Working in your shooting phase is okay because it doesn't mean the Plaguecaster can be advancing up the table in order to get in range of it, but if your opponent is just not in line of sight of you, then it doesn't do anything, and if they don't want to charge you in melee anyway, which a lot of armies don't because Death Guard typically have very strong reactive effects in the fight phase, then they also wouldn't do anything either. I guess what we're trying to do here is force a situation where your opponent is disincentivized from committing their high OC value units onto your objectives because you can reduce the damage they take, and that allows you to use Spread the Sickness to lock in those objectives and score them throughout the remainder of the game, but it doesn't feel like it's quite as clean as it could be. We talked in the Eldari video about how psychic powers might be greatly transformed from their 9th edition incarnation and the form that they may take, and it's looking like, based on the evidence given in this Death Guard article, that that is going to be the case. The Psychers are going to look like they have these abilities that work on a 2+ and have the potential to damage themselves if they don't roll that 2+, which, in my opinion, is unfortunate, given that we also know the command reroll stratagem does not allow you to reroll those abilities. Now, moving on, we do have a little bit of a look at the Plagueburst Mortar from the Plagueburst Crawler. This thing has gotten a pretty serious side grade, losing a point of AP and not getting the same increase in strength that we've seen from other similar ranged weapons. It's going to have a tough time wounding vehicles at only strength 8, given that a lot of vehicles are going to be toughness 9+, so it's going to mostly be wounding on 5s. Fortunately, it has gotten that lethal hits plague ability, so that's going to be able to make up for that loss in strength a little bit, and it has gone from D6 shots to D6+3. It retains the indirect fire and blast keywords, making it even more effective against infantry, and comes in at an impressive AP1 for 2 damage. This is going to make the Plagueburst Mortar actually very good against medium infantry, assuming that you can directly see them, which the Plagueburst Crawler oftentimes can because it's wanting to fire its entropy cannons anyway. Then firing at multi-wound infantry with a pretty high volume blasting, you're going to get D6+4, D6+5 shots on this weapon very commonly. 2 damage attack is pretty good. But on top of that, it also has the Spore-Laced Shockwaves ability. This forces a Battle Shock test on enemy infantry units hit by the Plagueburst Mortar. Now, we have full rules for how Battle Shock interacts with the command phase, and we do know that mid-turn Battle Shock is actually not super useful, unless it's situations where your opponent is trying to score secondaries or hold down an objective for a full round, and removing their OC value in the middle of your turn is actually going to be deleterious for them. Basically, all it does is prevent your opponent from using stratagems on that unit. And the reason for that is because that Battle Shock will wear off as soon as it gets to the start of the next command phase. So that unit is immediately going to become unbattle shocked, and they will only have to retest for Battle Shock if they're at half strength. Honestly, I'm kind of impressed by the Plagueburst Mortar. It seems pretty good and a little bit more targeted at dealing with infantry. It's not quite the all-rounder weapon that we saw it be in 9th edition. Now, last but certainly, I think least, is a stratagem for Death Guard. This is Sanguis Flux. It's used in the fight phase and grants a Death Guard unit from your army sustained hits 1 until the end of that phase. If they are within range of an infected objective marker, they instead get sustained hits 2. So they're going to get additional hit on hit rolls of 6 or 2 additional hits, basically a Tesla effect if the objective marker that they're on is infected. Now, if we have ways other than standing on an objective for an entire battle round to infect objectives, I think this kind of interaction is actually going to be pretty useful. But if the play pattern is that basically that you have to get onto an objective, sit there for an entire round to infect it, then convince your opponent to charge you and fight you on that objective while their own toughness is being reduced, and you'll probably represent a lot of other corruptive effects thanks to that objective, that doesn't seem that useful. Sustained hits 1 for 1 CP might be okay if you're looking for some additional damage from a unit, but until we see some really heavy hitting units, I'm not sure it's going to be that good. Maybe it's okay on Death Shroud Terminators, I don't know, these big, powerful melee units, but currently it is just kind of mediocre, I guess. So overall, not a particularly inspiring reveal article for Death Guard this time around. Having lost a bunch of defensive effects, but still retaining a game plan basically revolving around being defensive means that that. I hope we see some really good stuff in the Index once it comes out. I'm hoping that there's characters and there's other synergies that can be stacked onto a unit. We see maybe a Miasma of Pestilence character who can drop -1 to hit, -1 to wound, fight first on these Death Guard units. That would be pretty sweet, but as it stands, they seem totally mediocre. So let me know down in the comment section what you think about them. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great. I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming. You want to talk about Death Guard with me? Not really. No? Okay. You just want to snuggle?